Okay, we'll start. See, in last class, we have discussed the nature of religious language. Now, this is, as you know, one of the most important topics of part B of paper 2, philosophy of religion. In the last class, I told that in next class, we will be discussing various subtopics of this topic, that is philosophy, nature of religious language in detail, particularly those subtopics from which repeatedly previous years questions have been asked. Basically, if you remember, I put before five topics which were identified after analysis of previous year's question papers, because 10 to 12 years question papers I have analyzed, and these five topics, subtopics basically of religious nature of religious language were identified. And I told that these topics, subtopics, we will be discussing in detail in next class. Now, if you see, you can see the topics are first is religious language as non-cognitive. Second topic is, can religious language, or how can religious language be verified? Third is Braithwaite's non-cognitive theory of religious language. Fourth is Paul Tillich's statement that symbolic language alone is able to express the ultimate. And fifth is religious language symbolic? Now, if you see, overlapping topics are also there, because when you say non-cognitive and when you say Braithwaite's theory of non-cognitive, both are in a way overlapping, because Braithwaite is, you can say, a part of non-cognitive theories. There are other non-cognitive theories also. Verification brings logical positivism in this whole logical positivism. You might have studied in Western philosophy. So that is also very closely related with this. And then once you talk symbolic language, Paul Tillich will be there. So, these topics, if you can see, there are overlapping topics, but we will try to discuss, and the process or the model in which we will discuss will be, as you know, earlier also I told, uh, basically, introduction, then exposition of that uh, topic or subtopic, then critical evaluation, which will include criticism as well as concluding remarks also. So let us start with first topic. Now, first topic is religious language as non-cognitive. In last class, I told there are two views, cognitive and non-cognitive, but most of the theories lean towards non-cognitive view. Why this problem arises? Because, as you know, religious language talks about God, soul, and other experiences or other substances which you cannot verify through sense or through logic or through any other way. So, therefore, the non-cognitive interpretations of religion have come up. Now, what this view says basically, religious statements do not convey factual or propositional knowledge. So, this is the main thesis or main concept behind this, and therefore they are non-truth apt, but instead perform expressive, moral, or practical functions. So, this is an introduction type of thing. If you can understand that non-cognitive means they are not factual propositions, because science or day-to-day experience uh, is cognitive, because the same can be verified. But here, religious language describes those things which cannot be verified, but instead, still it's not meaningless, it's not useless. It performs certain functions, and those functions may be expressive, moral, practical, etc. Now, let us in detail try to understand what is the meaning of non-cognitive view of religious language. See, non-cognitive, basically, as I told, is to deny that it functions, or the language or religious language functions like scientific or historical discourse. Now, because same thing, religious statements are not intended to describe certain objective realities which can be verified. Rather, this language expresses certain attitudes, commitments, emotions, orientations, etc. towards life. So, therefore, this the statements which are form part of religious language are meaningful but not factual. They may be affecting moral conduct, they may be inspiring devotion, they may be giving existential direction, but definitely they don't describe those facts which can be directly verified. So, therefore, this view is opposed to cognitive view. Now, cognitive view is also there, which is supported by less number of philosophers. That view says that religious claims are factual assertions about reality. But non-cognitive view says that they are expressions of faith rather than propositions of knowledge. So here again, faith versus reason debate, if you remember, that can be also interpolated. Now, logical positivism, as I told, is directly related with this chapter of philosophy of religion, because they continuously they have rejected the cognitive meaning of philosophical discourse and also religious language as well. Now, as you know, and accordingly, they are strong supporters of non-cognitive approach of or interpretation of religious language, because they have given what we know verification principle, that a sentence or a statement is meaningful only if it is analytically true or empirically verifiable, that is synthetic. So analytic or synthetic statements are only true statements. All others are meaningless. So what they say, since religious statements regarding God, regarding soul, regarding immortality, regarding life after death or rebirth, etc., satisfy neither of this condition. Neither they are analytic nor empirically verifiable. Therefore, they are cognitively meaningless. So this was the view of logical positivism, which strongly supported non-cognitive view of religious language. So, basically, what they want to say is theology, that is religion, resembles more like poetry or music for them rather than knowledge. But logical positivism was criticized, as you know. A lot of criticism has come against logical positivism, and most important of those criticism, that verification principle which they have given, that is analytic and synthetic statements are only verifiable or only true, itself is not verifiable. So that kind of circular logic, when they apply for religious language, definitely it invites a lot of criticism. Now, R.B. Braithwaite is one of the very, very important proponents of non-cognitive interpretation of religious language. He has given the theory that religious language has moral commitment. Now, the non-cognitive interpretation which was offered by Braithwaite argues that the religious statements express moral intentions rather than metaphysical beliefs or metaphysical truths. So they express moral intentions rather than metaphysical beliefs. Religious narratives function as moral paradigms that guide behavior and character. So therefore, the meaning of religious language lies in its ethical consequences. This is R.B. Braithwaite's non-cognitive theory. As I told, non-cognitive is a broader term. It contains a number of philosophers or a number of theories. So one is R.B. Braithwaite, another is R.M. Hare, another very, very important philosopher supporting non-cognitive. He has given a Blick theory. Now, what is Blick? Blicks are fundamental ways of seeing the world that are not falsifiable. So this is definition of blicks: fundamental ways of seeing the world that are not falsifiable, but deeply influence interpretation and action. So it cannot be falsified, but still it affects interpretation and action. And according to here, religious beliefs fall in this category. So therefore, religious beliefs are blicks. So religious beliefs are blicks that guide life rather than hypothesis competing with scientific explanation. So he has told that it may not be scientific, it may not be cognitive, but still very, very useful. And accordingly, he has given the Blick theory. Now, as I told, we will go by introduction, exposition, and then critical evaluation, and then finally conclusion. So now, I have already, in brief, we have discussed the non-cognitive view of religious language. Now, let us try to find out what are the critical points against this non-cognitive view. Now, non-cognitive view definitely has strengths and also weaknesses. Now, strengths because it avoids the problems of verification and falsification, which was highlighted by logical positivists and also later philosophers like Anthony Flew. It also explains emotional, moral, and motivational power of religion, because Hare and Blick, Hare and Braithwaite have clearly brought out this thing, and accounts for diversity of religious expressions without forcing them into rigid factual framework. But there are several negative points in this, or several objections. Now, first, the theory conflicts with the self-understanding of believers, who generally regard religious sentiments as claims about reality rather than mere expressions of attitude. So this is first an important point, because this downgrades basically religious language, particularly for a strong believer, because because any believer or strong believer believes that whatever religious statements are, they are describing some reality, God, or some other concepts which are, even though not verifiable, but quite important. Now, this non-cognitive view says, no, it's not about metaphysical truths. It's only about usefulness. Now, second criticism: by denying cognitive content, non-cognitive theories struggle to explain central religious practices such as prayer, worship, revelation, and belief in divine action. So this is again very, very important, because non-cognitive theories cannot explain these things. Why one should pray then? Why worshipping should be there? Why revelation and belief should be there in divine action? Because when it's not metaphysically true, then. Finally, also, critics such as Michel suggest removing truth claims altogether risks making religious beliefs immune to rational evaluation, thereby weakening meaningful dialogue between faith and reason. So this is also very important criticism. Now, in concluding remarks, we can definitely say that while non-cognitive approach successfully highlights the expressive and ethical dimensions of religion, because usefulness they describe, yet it is inadequate as complete account. A balanced position recognizes that religious language may function non-cognitively in expression and commitment, yet still aspire to refer meaningfully to an objective ultimate. This is the thing which is lacking in non-cognitive view of religious language. Now let us go to second subtopic: how can religious language be verified? As you know, verification debate was started very strongly by logical positivism. So that affects, this subtopic also, because as you in previous topic also we have seen that logical positivism clearly says that for them religious language is cognitively meaningless, because it describes something which cannot be verified. Now, definitely in philosophy, verification is closely linked with meaning and truth. So, a statement is often considered meaningful only if there is some way of confirming or testing it. So, definitely there is no way that religious language can be verified in that way or empirically testable. It cannot be. So there has to be some other way of verifying religious language. Now let us see what can be. But before that, we'll go in a little more detail. What kind of challenge logical positivism has given? Logical positivism has given verification challenge for religious language. Now, they say, as we have already studied earlier also, that statement is meaningful only if it is either analytically true or empirically verifiable. This is their verification principle. Now, since religious statements fail both the criteria, because God is a God, or even for that matter, soul, immortality, life after death, anything related to that is not an object of sense experience. Therefore, religious language is cognitively meaningless because it does not assert facts but merely expresses emotions or attitudes. And as we have seen in previous question also, that theology for them is more like poetry or music. But this position or this strong view of logical positivism was later criticized by subsequent philosophers, which they say that verification principle itself is not verifiable. And if you strongly believe in verification principle, then ethics, history, or aesthetics all will become meaningless. So, logical positivism in later phases, they started rethinking about their own theory. And then they have come out with a weak verification and modified positivism. Now, what is that? This is basically given by Ayer and Hempel. They suggest that a weak or indirect form of verification also can be possible for making something meaningful. So they say that a statement is meaningful if some possible experience is relevant to its truth, even if it cannot be conclusively verified. Now, this has softened the positivism or logical positivism verification principles tremendously, because it, it questions their own theory actually. If they keep on giving concessions, that their own theory becomes inconsistent. So, but then still it has given little better understanding and meaning of religious language. Now, subsequently came falsification debate. Now, subsequent to verification principle, Anthony Flew, another philosopher, he came up with a parable of gardener, and he claimed that the actual religious believers refuse to allow any possible experience to count against them. And they continuously keep on qualifying religious assertions. And therefore, he has given the statement that religious assertions die the death of 1,000 qualifications. But then another philosopher, Mitchell, contemporary philosopher, he argued in reply that religious beliefs does not ignore counter evidence but involve commitment and trust. Now, faith, in his opinion, is not blind, but neither is it abundant at the first sign of difficulty. But Michel's response definitely preserves meaningfulness without providing a clear method of verification, because This also is not providing any clear method of verification, but still it is providing some basis of meaningfulness or some part of meaningfulness. Another theory has come up, which was given by John Hick. He's another contemporary philosopher, very important. He has given the theory of eschatological verification. He says that certain religious statements, such as there is life after death, are not verifiable now, but can be verified after death. If such statements are true, they will be confirmed in the afterlife. If false, there will be no subject left to experience their falsity. Thus, what he says, religious language is verifiable in principle, even if not in practice. This is what John Hick's response. So, how it helps religious language? Because this theory, Hick's theory, preserves cognitive status of religious language, because he says it's verifiable. Not now, at least in principle, it is verifiable. It rests on the assumption of post-mortem survival, which itself cannot be independently verified. Now, there are alternative responses also, symbolic and non-cognitive views, which we have studied in previous topic. We'll again just go through that. Paul Tillich has given symbolic theory. He says that religious language is symbolic, pointing beyond itself to ultimate reality, rather than describing empirical facts. Similarly, Wittgenstein and Phillips argued that religious language operates with a distinct language game or form of life, where demands of empirical verification are misplaced, actually not required. So basically, what these approaches do, they shift the attention from verification to meaning, use, and religious practice. They are not directly answering the verification question, but they are shifting the attention to meaning, use, and religious practice. Now, critical evaluation will go, because as I told, introduction, main exposition, so we have completed that. Now, critical evaluation and conclusion. See, logical positivism definitely is correct to the extent that clarity and testability is not there in religious language, but they are very narrow criterion made themselves to rectify it subsequently in weak verification and falsification debates. Now, Hick's theory of verification or in principle verification, at least our scope of in principle verification, offers most systematic cognitive response, though it also depends on unverifiable assumptions. This is again a problem. Then symbolic and Wittgensteinian approaches. This approach avoids verification principle altogether, or verification problem altogether. They are not answering that. But what they are saying, that it's useful. It's a definite language game. So, which weakens religious truth claims itself. Now, in conclusion, definitely religious language cannot be verified through ordinary empirical methods. This is accepted fact. However, this does not render it meaningless. While thinkers like John Hick show that religious statements may be verifiable in principle, others argue that verification itself is an inappropriate demand. So, this debate reveals the distinctive nature of religious language, which resists scientific criteria while continuing to seek meaningful reference to ultimate reality. Now let us go to next subtopic, breath-based non-cognitive theory of religious language. This we have already partly studied in brief. Now here we will be taking up only this part, breath-based theory, non-cognitive theory, in detail. As you know, a non-cognitive interpretation offered by R.B. Braithwaite is basically moral intentions and commitments. He says that religious statements express moral intentions and commitments. And this was described in his book, An Empiricist View of the Nature of Religious Belief, which he wrote in 1955. So he's a 20th century philosopher. And as I told, his view is primarily that religious language expresses moral intentions and commitments rather than beliefs about objective divine reality. So it's not about metaphysical realities, but moral intentions and commitments. Now, why he has come up with this? What is, because understanding his philosophical background and influence will make us understand better why he has come out with this view. See, breathwork theory emerges in broader context of logical positivism and the empiricist demand for verifiability, and then rise of non-cognitive theories in ethics, emotivism. So all this have directly influenced Braithwaite for coming out with non-cognitive theory. Though he 100% or fully not accept all these views, but definitely he was deeply influenced by these views. So his approach also shows the affinity with Immanuel Kant, because ethics primarily is associated with Immanuel Kant also, and also later Wittgenstein's ideas, where meaning is linked to use rather than factual description. So these two important philosophers have also influenced R.B. Braithwaite. Now, what is the core of Braithwaite's theory? Let us try to understand that. Religious language is non-cognitive, first point. Second, it does not describe facts about God, or for that matter, any reality which is supreme reality, or maybe soul, maybe any other matter, such matter or reality. It expresses a person's intention to live morally. So religious utterances function like moral declarations, not theoretical propositions. This is his view. He says, as example, that statement God is love does not describe any divine attribute. Rather, it means I commit myself to a loving way of life. So, meaning of religious language lies not in its truth conditions, but in its practical consequences for conduct. Now, what is the role of religious stories and doctrines? Now, he says that these have special importance, such as life and sacrifice of Christ or stories of saints, prophets, and martyrs. These narratives are not to be taken as historical or metaphysical truths, but these function as a moral paradigms, inspire believers to adopt certain ethical ideals. Religious doctrines, therefore, act as a motivational frameworks that reinforce moral discipline and commitment. So basically, he is linking religion with morality, with motivation to do something good. So basically what he says, primary function of religion is ethical. Religious belief strengthens moral resolve. Religion motivates action where purely rational ethics may fail. So therefore, religion supplements morality by providing emotional depth, narrative force, and commitment, rather than any metaphysical knowledge of reality. Now, since we are going a little deep in Braithwaite's theory, let us compare with other non-cognitive theories. Now, R.M. Hare has given Blick theory. We have already gone through. Wittgenstein has given game theory, that religious language as a part of language game. Anthony Flew, he criticized religious claims for lacking falsifiability. So, these kind of comparisons you can have with the three philosophers. So, unlike Hare and Wittgenstein, Braithwaite's grounds religious meaning specifically in moral intention, not merely in word view or linguistic practice. So, there is a difference also. Now, let us try to critically evaluate Braithwaite's theory. Now, it has important strengths also because it avoids verification problem itself, which was raised by logical positivism. And it also preserves the meaningfulness of religious language because it explains its moral value, its ethical value, and ethical influence of religion on human beings. But there are serious objections. First, the theory reduces religion to morality, neglecting its metaphysical, devotional, and experiential dimensions. So, but because religion is not only moral, has not only moral dimension, it has metaphysical, devotional, experiential dimensions also, and which was totally neglected by Braithwaite. So, therefore, many believers regard statements such as God exists as a claims about reality, not merely moral claims. Secondly, Braithwaite's account fails to explain central religious practice such as prayer, worship, grace, salvation, and divine action. Because once you make it only more ethical or moral, all these you cannot cover. Finally, Basil Mitchell argue that faith involves commitment, but not at cost of abandoning truth claims altogether. So Braithwaite's theory anyway abandons truth claims altogether because it does not discuss about reality. It only discusses about its moral utility of religious language. So therefore, in conclusion, Braithwaite's theory is influential because it avoids the problem of verification. It expresses moral value of religion. But then, since it avoids totally metaphysical claims, it gives an incomplete account of religion by neglecting its cognitive and metaphysical aspirations. So, therefore, a satisfactory religious language must include all those also, along with moral. So, moral function and ultimate reality. I will go to next. How non-cognitive we have discussed in detail. Now we'll come to symbolic. So next two topics or subtopics are discussing symbolic nature of religious language. And main proponent in this is Paul Tillich. He has given the statement, symbolic language alone is able to express the ultimate. So what he says that basically he expresses that the religious language has literal limit in expressing ultimate reality. It cannot, because as you know in Kant also phenomena, nomina, because phenomena you can know, but nomina you cannot know. So he says that there are limits of religious language which transcend, because reality transcends all finite concepts. So therefore, any language or any religious language has to talk in a symbolic manner only, because you can talk in real manner or absolute correct manner about finite concepts only. But since religious reality transcends all those finite concepts, the religious language definitely has to be symbolic. Now, his concept will go in little detail. He rejects the idea of God as a supreme being among other beings. Instead, he defines God as a being itself, or the ground of being. For him, God is not an object within this world, but the condition that makes all existence possible. So he says that since ordinary language is designed to describe finite objects, it inevitably fails when applied literally to God. And this is what was told by Kant also, if you remember, because he has given the theory of phenomena. versus noumena. So thus any literal or descriptive language about God's results in distortion, turning God into an object and thereby denying divine transcendence. Now, just to understand a little more better why a literal language fails while describing metaphysical realities, let us try to understand that. Literal language objectifies God, reduces the infinite to finite categories, treats God as a being rather than being itself. Being itself. So statements like God is a person or God is a father, if taken literally, leads to anthropomorphism. Hence, he says that literal language is inadequate for expressing the ultimate or God or metaphysical truths. So, according to him, nature of religious language is symbolic because this is the only appropriate mode of religious expression. A symbol, unlike sign, because he differentiates between symbol and sign also, does not merely point to something else, it participates in the reality it signifies. So, for him, symbols have four characteristics. What are they? They point beyond themselves to ultimate reality. They participate in the reality to which they point. They open up levels of reality otherwise closed to us. They are historically and culturally conditioned and can die. So these four qualities of symbols he has described. And he has given example also. For example, calling God as a father is symbolic. It does not describe any biological fact or any expresses qualities such as care, authority, but it participates in believers' experience of the divine. Now, symbol and ultimate concern, let us try to understand this also. For Paul Tillich, religion is concerned with ultimate concern, that which demands unconditional commitment to the divine, to God, or to ultimate reality. So symbols are capable of expressing this concern because they engage the whole person, intellect, emotion, and will. Doctrines, rituals, and myths are symbolic expressions of humanity's encounter with the ultimate. So thus, symbolic language does not provide factual information about God, but mediates existential meaning. This is what his view. Now let us critically evaluate this Paul Tillich's idea of symbolic nature of religious language. Now it has strengths because it successfully avoids logical positivism challenge of charge of meaninglessness by rejecting factual description, because he says that it's not the aim of religious language itself. It also preserves divine transcendence and explains emotional and existential power of religious symbols. However, there are a number of negative points. First, critics say that if all religious language is symbolic, it becomes difficult to distinguish truth from mere metaphor. Second, since symbols are historically conditioned and can lose meaning, religious truth appears relative and unstable. So this is again a strong criticism. Thirdly, Paul Tillich's conception of God as a being itself has been criticized for being overly abstract and impersonal. Whereas for any worship, any you can say religious rituals, you require a personal God. So thinkers like Mitchell argue that symbolic language must still retain some cognitive content. Otherwise, religion risks losing its claim to truth altogether. Conclusion, definitely it has strength because symbolic language alone is able to express the ultimate. This is what statement. It highlights the fundamental limits of literal language in theology. This is true. While symbolic language may not describe God in factual terms, it provides the only meaningful way to express humanity's relationship with ultimate reality. But unless balanced with some cognitive or analogical references, this is also required. This approach risks dissolving religious truth into mere symbolism. So, a balanced view recognizes symbolism as a necessary but not sufficient for religious language. So, this is the conclusion of Paul Tillich's theory. Now, next subtopic is also like that, but here we have gone through Paul Tillich's theory. Here we are answering the same question in a different manner. This has come in previous year's exam. Is religious language symbolic? So, in introduction, same thing has been written. Why this question comes actually? Because religious language is not cognitive. It cannot be verified. Verification principle itself says that it's meaningless. So a number of theories have come, and accordingly, it's symbolic, that theory has also come up. Now let us try to understand again meaning of symbolic religious language. A symbol is not merely a sign. It participates in the realities it signifies and conveys meaning at multiple levels: intellectual, emotional, and existential. We have already seen 4 qualities of symbols in previous topic. So to say that religious language is symbolic means that religious statements do not describe God in a factual or literal manner, but express humanity's response to and relationship with ultimate reality. Example, same thing. God is Father or God is King is not in a literal sense. Otherwise, it will turn into anthropomorphism. But it is a symbolic expression that communicates dependence, authority, care, and moral order. Now, the question, if you remember, was, is religious language symbolic? So this is a very brief introduction kind of. Now let us see what are the arguments in favor of religious language being symbolic, and what are arguments in against, and then we'll try to critically evaluate that. Now, we have already seen the strongest defense of symbolic religious language was given by Paul Tillich, because he argued that God is not being among other beings, but being itself, or the ground of being. And since there is a limit for literal language, because it is there to describe only finite objects, its application to God leads to distortion and anthropomorphism. Hence, he has proposed that religious language is symbolic, because this only is able to express the ultimate. Religious symbols, according to him, open up the levels of reality otherwise inaccessible and express what he calls ultimate concern. Now, this view of Paul Tillich is also supported by Rudolf Bultmann, who had advocated demythologization. He said that biblical myths should not be taken literally, but symbolically, as expressions of existential truths about human existence rather than cosmological facts. Similarly, Wittgenstein, he has come up with game theory. Religious language functions within a particular form of life. Its meaning lies in its use and practice rather than literal descriptions, supporting the view that symbolic interpretation is more appropriate than empirical verification. Now, what are the arguments against purely symbol view? Let us see that also. Now, symbolic interpretation, as we have seen in previous subtopic, has serious objections. Critics say that if religious language is entirely symbolic, it becomes difficult to distinguish truth from metaphor. Religious claims risk being reduced to poetic expressions without any objective reference. Mitchell, one of the important contemporary philosophers, contends that believers usually regard religious statements as making claims about reality, not merely as symbolic expressions of feeling or commitment. So prayer, worship, belief in divine action presupposes that God is more than a symbolic construct. And if it's only symbolic, then whole concept of deeper religion fails. Further, excessive symbolism may lead to relativism. Since symbols are historically and culturally conditioned, they may change, they may be modified, they may change or lose meaning also over time. So this threatens stability and universality of religious truths. Now, there are certain, see, one view we have seen for a symbolic nature of religious language, another view we have seen against. Now, what are the middle positions? There are some philosophers who have given middle positions also. Because the question is religious language symbolic? So, for and against, and then let us see the middle position. What is the middle position? Thomas Aquinas has come up with analogical theory. He says that religious language is analogical rather than symbolic. When terms like good, wise are applied to God, they are neither used in exactly the same sense as in human context, nor in a completely different sense. What he says, this preserves both divine transcendence and cognitive reference. He says that good or, if you good or let us say wise, for God it becomes infinitely good or infinitely wise. So therefore, this preserves divine transcendence also. Similarly, Ramsey, he has suggested that religious language functions through models and qualifiers. So he has combined basically symbolic insight with cognitive intent. So these views are somewhere in between symbolic and non-symbolic view. So in conclusion, religious language is largely symbolic because literal language is inadequate to express. So part of it is true. Symbolism helps to preserve divine transcendence and explains the existential power of religious discourse. However, religious language cannot be purely symbolic without losing its claim to truth and reality. So what is a balanced position? A balanced position recognizes that religious language is symbolic in form but cognitive or analogical in intent, aiming to speak meaningfully through though imperfectly about ultimate reality. So this completes the 5 subtopics which we have selected from nature of religious language. Hope that this will be useful to the students of main exam. Next class, we will come up with other interesting and difficult topic pertaining to philosophy papers. Thank you for watching and joining the class.